right. Well, speaking of moving on and speaking of politics, we've got an election in Brazil. Obviously, we're going to talk about that. I'm hoping that Andre could give some clarity, but I don't know if there is clarity in the
No, it's too
Brazilian
early.
election.
Too early, yeah.
Yeah, what are you thinking for this election, Jean?
It's too early. I mean, the opposition hasn't even launched any candidates. I think we have to wait till like early spring before there's any sense of what's going to happen. It seems like Lula's strong right now, but will he be strong in the spring? Or it all depends on who the candidates are and what kind of campaigns they run. And I think like everywhere, incumbents are at a disadvantage. A good candidate could could win. Lula's very old and yeah, and he's the incumbent. Now he's the incumbent. He's responsible for everything. So I think it's super important for Brazil because another 4 years of Lula would be really devastating. And I think the opportunities are really significant. With the right president and the right policies, and the environment now is changing so rapidly. It's like a whole new world. So, like the reasons that held back Brazil over the past 30 years may not be there anymore. Maybe there are new opportunities.
Well, we're going to find that out. And speaking of that, we're going to hear Andre's joined us here. Andre Loes, how are you?
I'm fine, guys. What about
Hey,
you?
hey, Andre. Great to
Hi,
see you.
John. Great to see you. Great to see you, Tom. Tom, we saw each other in Brazil some time ago.
Yeah.
Jean, it's a long time.
It's been a long time.
Been a long time.
Well, listen, Andre, thank you for coming on. We have a lot to talk about. What I want to do, though, is give a little introduction, a little bio, and then we could just start chatting. So, Andre, you are currently the chief economist of Vivest, which is, I believe, the largest supplementary pension fund manager in Brazil. Prior to Vivest, you were the chief economist for Latin America for Morgan Stanley for a number of years. You worked in asset management for a while in Brazil, and for 3 years, you were the CEO of the Fundo Garantor de Creditos, a deposit insurance company. You were chief Latin American economist for both HSBC and Santander Brazil, while you also were head of equities at Santander. That's how Jean and I had most of our interactions. You started your finance career as an economist or economic advisor for the Brazilian government, the government trade department, and as an economist for one of the first Brazilian investment banks, Bozano Simonsen, a very famous bank back in the day. So let's just start with the big picture. I mean, the key to Brazil is always politics, it's interest rates. But for those who don't really know, explain a little bit about the Brazilian politics. It is a blood sport, obviously, and why we were just touching on next year's election. Some people think it could be the most important in Brazil's history. Some think not. But let's start with politics, Andre, and go from there.
Great. Every time we have an election, people think it's the most divisive and the most important one, and not necessarily it will be. Well, I guess that the point is the following. When back in the day we discussed about Brazil, we had many problems. We had the balance of payments problems, inflation problems. This has all been set, for improved a lot in the last 20, 25 years. Part of the implementation of a monetary regime that is now functional, everybody knows it, is mature, as well as a floating exchange rate regime that the country and its companies have learned to live with, has been at the same time in parallel. You had always struggled with the fiscal accounts. So many parts of the economy are okay. They have well-established, well-known regimes. The fiscal has always been a problem. After you approved the fiscal responsibility law in 2000, you had most part of the time some equilibrium in fiscal accounts, but mostly increasing both spending and collection. So up to the moment, this was no longer feasible because the fiscal charge was already too high for a developing country. So after that, we experienced a very well succeeded, in my opinion at least, spending cap from 2017 to 2022. But I would say from 2020 onwards already, with the escape clauses being used. And then we got back to this regime in the fiscal, which I call tax more to spend more. That's what Brazil did since Fernando Henrique Cardoso at the end of the 90s. This is the big Achilles heel of the country. We had under this Lula administration, differently from the previous Lula administrations in the early 2000s, when Lula proved much more fiscally responsible. He started this third term that he had as a president, inverting what would be the natural electoral cycle. So instead of saving in the first 2 years to spend in the last 2 years, he started by increasing spending, permanent spending, 1.6% of GDP in 2023, and then going after more collection. And this has been the big political fight in Brazil over the last years. Society and Congress putting limits on the increase in collection because it's already too much of a fiscal charge, and the government trying to get collection here and there, and not reducing the speed of growth of spending material. Of course, 2003 was different because when you increased a lot, but in 2024, 2025, you keep having spending growing materially above inflation. So this has turned into a situation where, after some consolidation of that to GDP between 2018, 17, and 21, you are back to a situation where the debt grows to 3 percentage points of GDP per year. And it will be very important that the new administration, even if the new administration is Lula 4, that it shows gives some indications that in 2027, after the elections, you start to have some restraint on that. So I think that's the picture in a country that is as polarized as the US now in political terms. So more and more elections in Brazil will be more or less like in the US. You will win by one or the other side by 1.5% or 2% of the vote, which makes things tough in Congress to approve legislation. And I guess that sensation that the next election could be very important, because at the level of that we will be by the beginning of next administration, 80 something percent, according to the way Brazilians look at the debt. If you look at the way IMF looks at it, which they counts all the treasury bonds that are in the portfolio of the central bank, it will be 90%. You have to be very careful, because I don't think that a classical default is something that will never occur in Brazil, because 90% of the debt is in local currency with locals and so on. But you can have very strong non-linearities at some point in terms of precification of the assets. And I think that's a concern that investors have to have if in 2027 you don't change a little the way fiscal accounts are being handled.
Andre, do you think, given next year is an election year, that we will have a significant fiscal expansion that could support the economy over this period?
for growth.
Is Brazil in a similar situation that the U.S. is in, where actually increasing interest rates benefited the owners of assets, which tend to be the rich people, and promoted consumption and supported the economy significantly? I mean, we've seen a very strange trend in the U.S. where the 1% or the top 10% are driving all the consumption. Is that the situation in Brazil on steroids with
No, no, it's different. Here, what you have is that the labor market is reaching record lows in terms of unemployment. Remember that unemployment in Brazil, what we used it to think it was natural unemployment in Brazil was like 8%, 8.5. It came down to around 6, with some cost for inflation, but not as much as one would expect. This suggests to us that there has been improvement in productivity gains after a long period with no productivity gains. Uh, uh, you start to have positive growth in productivity. This may have to do with some of the reforms that were made under the Temer and the beginning of the Bolsonaro administration, mostly the labor reform. I think there is a second reform that's not much talked about, but it has been very important. You may remember that under the Rousseff administration, there was high investment over GDP, but productivity growth was negative, basically because you had a lot of distortion with subsidized rates from BNDES and an enormous growth of the balance sheet of the Brazilian Development Bank, but with directing investment to places where not necessarily you would have more productivity or your comparative advantage. This has changed in 2017. You modified the rate under which BNDES lends. Now it's a rate that is close to Selic, to the base rate, and uniform for all the sectors. And I believe that the allocation of investments is much, much better than it was at that time, and this enhances productivity gains. And I would say, to say a good thing about the current government, I have blamed them for very high increase in spending. Lula kept the very important privatization on or concession of public sector, especially in infrastructure, in transportation infrastructure, ports, airports, urban mobility, that had resumed with the Temer. I was concerned that for ideological reasons they would stop that, but not. And in a country where infrastructure investment has been lagging for such a long time, this kind of thing tends to give you a marginal gain in productivity that can be very important. So you have more productivity gains and you have a low unemployment. And what you are having is that real income growing like 3.5, 4, between 4 and 5 in some moments, percentage points per year. So it's consumption across the board. It's not only consumption of the high end of consumers.
Why is it, Andre? In any other country, interest rates at this level, real interest rates at this level, would cause a major recession. Why does it not have that impact in Brazil?
I guess that the fiscal impulse has, in a way, offset that. And the labor market has one specific situation, which is lack of, not lack of, but a reduction in the growth of labor supply. This is happening everywhere. This is happening uh, because of demographics in every country in the world, or almost every country in the world. But in the case of Brazil, the increase in the ticket of the Bolsa Familia program had a strong impact on that. If you cut into courts of revenue, the labor market, you see that those under two minimum wages, which is the way we cut it here, so the lower income, the participation rate has come down like 3 to 4 percentage points since 2022, when the Bolsa Familia ticket was doubled. And it was not only the ticket. Under during the pandemics, there was a special paycheck program that when you ended that, at the end of the day, part of the people that were not at the Bolsa Familia were incorporated to that. So it was number of people plus doubling the ticket, and this is causing the participation rate not coming back. We are still like 0.8% below COVID, below pre-COVID levels.
Andre, we're talking about interest rates here, and I think for the last couple of years, a lot of the economists were expecting rates to drop pretty dramatically. They haven't. What is your forecast for? Because obviously, a drop in rates would be very significant boost to the stock market and hard assets in Brazil. So, what's your forecast for interest rates? Let's say for the next 6 to 12 months into the election period, which is going to be tough.
Okay, the central bank has been really pursuing the center of the target. We have a new governor that took office 1 year ago, an indication of Mr. Lula. So people were concerned that Gabriel Galípolo could be a little more lenient and look more at the cap of the range. It's not the case. He is pursuing the center. With that, we believe that they will be able to cut only by March next year, because then here the central bank publishes all the elasticities of their model, so we can reproduce it. There is a divergence in terms of the output gap, the way markets estimate that and the way the central bank do. But this would be when you forecast in the houses that do it well, compared with the central bank, they would be like 0.3% below in their estimates of inflation. So we believe that by March, they will have their own model showing in 2027, which is their horizon, 3.1, 3.2%. So they start cutting. They can't cut that much if the fiscal impulse is there. So we believe they will cut from 15 to somewhere between 12.5 and 13 by the end of 2026. This will be allowed for by the previous monetary restriction and a fiscal impulse, which will happen, but is not enormous. If this is not true, you have an enormous fiscal impulse next year. Perhaps not even to this range, 12.5 to 13, it will be possible. And 2027 is a big question mark, and that's why probably markets see this election as such an important election. Let me give you an example. The budget is sent in August to the Congress, and the budget will give you a reasonable idea of what will be the final form of the budget proposal. The final form will not be that different from the proposed form. If in August 2026, Lula's Minister of Finance sends a budget proposal, that is a budget proposal that starts to show some adjustment on the rise of spending, markets will be calm. The long end of the curve will help. Inflation expectations will be more tame, and the central bank would be able perhaps to go up to 12, 11.5 in this first leg of the monetary. I lost the word in English. The reduction of interest rates. Of course, by 2027, central bank may pause a little to see what will happen with the fiscal. But it is, to your point, I think it is very difficult to get back to a nominal Selic of 8%, for instance, which would mean real interest rates of 4.5 or so, if you don't have a clear a change in the fiscal perspectives by 2027. On the other hand, if this is seen as credible by the markets, the curve can adjust very quickly and give the central bank the chance of going there. So things can also change very quickly if you have a framework that is more credible than the one we have in the fiscal now.
Andre, what is it about Brazil that these cycles require such high levels of real rates? Like nobody else in the world requires this.
Yeah, I think part of that, and I don't pretend to have the whole answer. It's very tricky. In fact, I think there is one thing related to how effective Selic is to generate a adjustment compared to other countries, because we do have here a lot of earmarked credit. Earmarked credit is still perhaps one third of the total credit, be it through the NDS or through earmarked credit with special rates, subsidized rates for agro industry and real estate. This is something that started back then when interest rates were so high, inflation was so high that no bank would lend to that. Now everybody would love to lend to those two, but you have the lobbies and that make it difficult to take it out. So Selic will affect directly like 2/3 of the whole credit and not the totality. I guess the fiscal impulse has been most part of the time sabotaging monetary policy, if you will. I think that a good counterexample is what happened in 2019. The spending cap was approved and started to be effective in 2017. It started to generate a very important change in the dynamics of the debt to GDP. By 2019, debt to GDP started to come down. It's amazing how in the second half of 2019, the central bank was able to push interest rates down to 4.5. There was still a slack in the economy. So I do some adjustment to see what would have been this rate, this nominal rate. We're talking nominal rate here. If we were already with an output gap around zero, it would be 6%, which is amazingly low. And with inflation around 3, we're talking about 3% real interest rates. We had that in the second half of 2019. In the third year, we were applying the spending cap regime, fiscal regime. So, in fact, a change in the fiscal dynamics gives the central bank a lot of space to start practicing acceptable rates, which are more in line with what our peers would be having in order to tame inflation, as you mentioned. I guess that in 2027, it will be impossible not to get back to a discussion about caps for the growth of spending. I think even in a Lula administration, this will a reality will impose itself in the sense it will be less strong than what was the case with Temer. Probably markets will see it as less binding, but I think that this thematic will get back.
What is your general view on the politics and the election and the likelihood of Lula winning? And who's going to run against him, and what are they offering? What policy framework would they be pushing?
Well, as we speak, Lula is the favorite. He is the incumbent to start with. Typically, incumbents are favorites. But also his approval rate is back. It has reduced close to 30%. Now it is back to between 40 and 50%, which typically allows the incumbent to be reelected at those levels. Obviously, there is another variable on this polls that makes a lot of difference close to the election, which is rejection. So Bolsonaro, for instance, had an approval rate of 44% close to the election in 2002, and he lost because his rejection was 52 or so. So if 52% of the people say they will not vote for you, even if you are approved by almost 100% of the ones that will vote for you, you lose. So Lula has a rejection around 50%. So I think he has 1 year to try to work down his rejection to somewhere between 45 and 50. If he does so with the approval he has now, you know, past the past history would tell you that he would be reelected. The problem with the opposition is in part that uh, Bolsonaro uh, is still the big name of the right of the center. He will not be able to run, even if he goes to jail. Even if he's not going to jail, he will be. He has an impediment to run. Uh, so it's still uncertain who is the candidate. Tarcísio Gomes de Freitas, the governor of São Paulo, is someone that markets would love to see as the candidate, but it's difficult to bet that he would be a candidate, and probably he would unify more all the camps of the right of the center. But he has a re-election in São Paulo that is nothing's almost done, but it's I would say he would have a lot of chances of getting reelected. Just to refresh the minds of the people that are looking at this podcast, São Paulo is 33% of the Brazilian economy, is a budget that is enormous. So running São Paulo is per se a big thing. So I think he will be very in doubt to see if by April, which is when he has to go out of the São Paulo government in case he runs, he will be in doubt if he runs for president or not. If it's not him, one of the governors, other governors of the right of the center, the governor of Paraná, or the governor of Goiás, or the governor of Minas Gerais, would probably be the candidate, in my view, with less chances than Tarcísio would have. I think that these people, what they offer is something that is uh, less paternalistic than what the left offers nowadays, which goes hand in hand with what has been the changes in the Brazilian society. You have more people with entrepreneurial desires, less keen to be helped by the government, to live with government transfers. So obviously Bolsonaro was much more at the right than these people. It just has generated rejection. But when you look at the results for Congress, the right of the center has the dominant situation now. And all the polls in the states, you have 2 Senate seats out of the 3 for each state being voted next year. Apparently, in the Senate, there will be a big increase of right of the center senators. In the lower house, you already have the right of the center dominating. So I think that this shows you that there is a general change in the society more towards right of the center. I think also Lula has the he pays the price of being there for a long time. So for the last 40 years, Lula is the name in Brazil. So even if he's a very very competent politician and he has delivered a message that for a long time was important for the Brazilian society, you have generational changes. So he's an old guy now, and what he says not necessarily, or the way he communicates is very different from what people are keen to hear nowadays. So I think this is the most important weakness of Lula, I think, is the time he's on the road already.
Andre, when you talk about the relationship between the U.S. and Brazil, obviously from the media here, from what we hear, obviously Trump is very adversarial to Lula. What is the reality, and what is the sort of the vibe in Brazil about how Lula is administering this relationship with Trump?
I think in general it's a positive one. I guess that the message or the narrative of defending sovereignty and negotiating with a lot of sobriety. Lula sometimes says strong things, but when approached the negotiation, he was very sober in the way of doing that. I think this was seen by society in general as positive. I think this was part of the reasons why he regained approval over the last months. Part of that was the control of inflation as well. There were other points, but this has helped him, and I think that the Minister of Finance and the Vice President of me, who is the one heading the discussions with the U.S., they have been able to work, I think, together with the Brazilian private sector to reduce the damages. At the end of the day, the list of exceptions were so big that you had some sectors only that are suffering a lot from the extra tariffs. So the tariffs are a microeconomic problem for a number of sectors. It's not a macroeconomic problem at this point, and I think Lula has been. And now the fact that he was able to get along well together with Trump personally, obviously, those things come and go with more volatile people, but I think it was a good approach.
Andre, what is the general attitudes towards the role of China in the Brazilian economy? On both sides, from the right and from the left.
I think that, of course, from the left is much more welcoming than from the right. But when you look at the Bolsonaro administration, he aligned more in narrative with the U.S., but at the end of the day, China is inescapable for Brazil. China is 30% of Brazilian exports. China has been growing a lot as a foreign investor in Brazil. So nowadays, if you look at the stock of capital, China is already, or stock of FDI in Brazil, China is already the second. So it's amazing the last 15 years, because you remember, for instance, the Spaniards had a big increase in investment in Brazil, Telefónica, Santander, BBVA, all those companies, Iberdrola, and they were for a while the second in stock. The U.S. is by far the first. All the major U.S. companies are in Brazil, but now China is the second. They already surpassed Spain. So both from the point of view of investment and trade, they are. So I had it's a very nice conversation when I was at Morgan Stanley. Typically, and the HSBC before the economic guys and the American embassy. Typically, when the new guy comes to Brazil, they talk to different economies. They go to the American and British banks, which are English speakers. And the last time that this happened, I was at Morgan Stanley, and the new attaché to Brazil asked me, so is that because the left has been more in development? It's structural, completely structural. I think the U.S. has backed up from Latin America, reduced a lot its engagement with Latin America, and China has increased a lot its engagement with Latin America. So I think now there is a more confrontational approach from the U.S., but what the U.S. has to do is to engage again with Latin America much more. And then I think for Latin America, this will be very good, because we will be in between the two giants. Of course, it's not always comfortable to be in between the two giants, especially when you come to the technological disputes, because the U.S. will be trying to have Brazil in different aspects adopting technology, U.S. technology. China will do the same for their part. But I think Brazil has, for a long time, avoided these discussions and tried to hide a little. And I think it has to work, play better the game. I think it will happen. And but I think that the most important thing is that the U.S. starts to engage more with Latin America again.
Do you think that the Chinese are having a negative impact on local industry? I mean, like
They
with the
are.
steel imports and
Yeah.
these Chinese companies don't really have a profit motive, right? They live in a completely different universe.
Yes.
What is the politics of that in Brazil?
Companies that feel they are having problems with that. There's a lot of anti-dumping processes on that. Nowadays, the Brazilian foreign trade department, processes that much quicker than in the past. So basically, you put extra tariffs or other barriers. Uh, for the consumer, it's good. So I would not say that the society has a problem with Chinese imports, but parts of the industry, of course, do. And when you look at statistics of price of imports, you see the reduction in the price of industrial goods imported by Brazil, especially those items that typically we import from China, coming down materially over the last, not only this year, I would say over the last 12 to 18 months, which more or less is more or less the same, in parallel with what we have seen in the PPI in China, which is.
So, Andre, one of my biggest concerns with Brazil long term is that the country has been heavily deindustrialized, and at the same time has become probably more dependent on commodities than in, you probably have to go back to the early 50s to get this level of reliance on commodities. And then this Chinese, effort to conquer industries in Brazil is just compounding this process. How does Brazil get out of this? With this increasing reliance on commodities and industrial sector that's weaker and weaker. How does Brazil fit in the world? Purely as a commodity exporter, or does it still have ambitions to be an industrial country like it was in 1980 when I first went to Brazil? It was still very much a industrialized country, and today it's just not. It's looking much more like Australia. But Australia has an educated population and Brazil doesn't.
I used to say that Australia is a big mine with one farm in the middle because they export meat as well. Brazil is a big farm with one mine in the middle exporting iron ore. The difference is that their GDP per capita is like 5 times the one of Brazil. But this is something that I wanted to put on that discussion. I don't think industrialization per se is necessary for you to have a higher per capita income. You have many countries that have achieved high per capita income with commodity specialization. We can talk Australia, Norway, Finland, Canada, New Zealand. What differentiates those countries from Brazil is quality of education, skilled work, and so on, quality of institutions. So I think that the comparative advantage that Brazil has in commodities is so huge that I think that is inescapable that we remain a commodity country. Having said that, I think we can build on those capabilities, including industry. For instance, if you are very strong on pulp and paper, you could have more like Finland does, industries of capital goods for pulp and paper. If we have more engineers who have better education, I think this will happen, and you will be a commodity-based country with some industry which is linked to this commodity chains, and with a higher per capita income. To me, the big people say that too much commodities is a curse from time to time, and it makes the country more accommodative. It is true, but I think that the real curse is the level of education and institutions in Brazil. I think that the level of institutions, even if you have the news of scandals here and there, I think compared to 30 or 40 years ago, it improved. Transparency improved a lot. Education improved much less. Quality. Now you have universalization, almost universalization of education, but we have an important part of our population which we call functional analphabets. People that studied up to the eighth year and they barely can read and understand the text. And so to see that the quality of the public school in many parts of the country is very low, so these people can have the grades without really learning things. I think, to me, if you ask me, I think that isolated, the thing that would help Brazil the most would be to have a serious improvement in the quality of basic education. And this would be probably enough with our base of commodities, which is very rich, to bring us from a middle income country to perhaps a low high income country. To become a really high income country, it's very difficult with the size of population and with the improvement that we would have to have in education. We would have to have something like Korea did. And I don't see the let's say the attitude in the country being one compared to that you saw in Korea, for instance.
Do you think the long-term potential growth for Brazil is around 2%? Is that about as
Yeah,
good as can be
yeah.
done?
It's perhaps better. It could be better because what you have is let's think about labor, capital, and productivity. So labor grows 0.8 per year now, working age population, and I think it will be more or less there. Perhaps it grows a little less at some point, but the biggest part of the demographic transition is done. Um, Capital, you have investment over GDP at 17, 18%. It is, if you have a slightly better business environment, you could easily bring that to 20% or 21. Nothing spectacular like Asia or even Peru under the big days of 10 years ago when they invested 26, 27% of GDP, but it's already better. And productivity gains are increasing in Brazil. So it is reasonable to think that you could have two, perhaps improve it more towards two, closer to 2.5. I think it's probably the best we can do. I don't think we will generate gains in productivity which allow us to go to 3 or 3.5%, unless you accept more inflation.
Andre, how is the relationship today between let's say government and then so private sector between Brazil and Argentina? I mean, given what's happened with Milei and the bailout by the U.S., like how are the Brazilians? How is trade, both private sector and then what's the government sort of relationship today?
Well, private sector is private sector. Trade is trade, and you have to trade. And Brazilians and Argentines already know that their governments come and go and change ideology and so on, and they'll keep trading. So there was a reduction in the mutual importance as final destination of exports that has happened over the years. I would say over the last 20 years. Argentina has already responded by almost 15 of Brazilian exports. Now it is perhaps 7%. This has to do partially with the point Jean made about deindustrialization, because they were the big receivers of Brazilian industrial exports. You have less industry in Brazil, so it has reduced. For the rest, we are competitors: soy, corn, meat, and so on. And Argentina, I think they diversified more their exports as well. They export a lot to Brazil in terms of dairy industry, processed food in general. They have a strong industry on that. So trade has more to do with the trends that are related to macro trends. Politics is the noise. Sometimes we have leftists and leftists. Sometimes we have right of the center there and leftists here, or like in Bolsonaro and Cristina, right of the center here and leftists there. So they don't talk to each other, but the diplomats, they know how it works and they keep talking. They're friends, and that's it. That's life. The thing is, Mercosur was the question is, was Mercosur an important move? Hard to say. You know that the economic literature about free trade zones says that the successful trade zone is one where you have more creation than deviation of trade. And I'm not sure they have created more than you have deviated. So countries are too volatile in macroeconomic terms, so the bilateral exchange rate moves too strongly. It makes it difficult for you to commit to have the other market as a market that you can really trust, not because you don't trust the people that will buy there, but because the currency can move in a way that put you out of the market in that market from one time to the other. So it's tough, but geography is destiny, and the best we do from each side is to keep trading and try to improve productivity together and so on.
What is the view of Brazil on the Venezuela situation today?
Lula has been close to Maduro for a long time, but in the last year, he took his distances after the last election. So I think that the situation, a worsening situation in Venezuela, wouldn't be as much as a problem politically for Lula than it would have been the case 2 years ago. I don't think that Lula has advanced to Trump the possibility Brazil could be a negotiator and try to help the discussions between U.S. and Venezuela. The first point is to understand what Trump's wants in Venezuela. I was in the IMF meetings 2 weeks ago, and I was in New York as well, and I heard from Americans different things, different views. It's a guy that is difficult to read. So this is the first thing. The second is, I'm not so sure Brazil would be that valuable on that discussion. Perhaps some value, because Colombia is the other country that is close to Venezuela, but of course, it won't be someone Petro that Trump would like to have as someone helping to negotiate. I think Lula is more palatable to the American administration. But let's see. I guess that in general, Brazilians don't pay attention to Venezuela. Brazilians are very inward looking, like Americans. We only think about local things, local politics, and when you have something like this confrontation with the Trump administration, people pay attention for a while, and then they get back to domestic things.
Do you have any thoughts on the situation on Argentina and on Chile, which has an election 2 weeks from now or 10 days from now?
Chile apparently will be back to the right of the center regime after having a left of center regime, which was very responsible. I think Boric. People sometimes say, well, the left will go to Chile. I said, well, it's a Chilean left. Being a Chilean, everything that is Chilean is better in the region than just the fact that it's a Chilean thing. It's, my admiration for the country is big. What happened to Chile was very interesting. What happened in 2019 and then all the failed attempts to change the constitution looked to me like a teenage robbery or something like this. I don't want to be the nice guy, the right guy for a while, and then society came back and said, well, we don't like confusion in this country. They don't like confusion. They're very conservative. And then with the rise in in violence that we have there, which compared to Brazil is nothing, but for the Chileans, makes a big difference. I guess that they are back to something that is more right of the center. The people say the cast could be more on the extreme right. I don't know. When I was at Morgan Stanley and I had the coverage of Chile, I talked to people from his camp, and I think it's reasonable people. So he may be able to have a good team and so on. So I know Chile is not a place that the only concern I have with Chile is the fact that the copper centered model doesn't yield the growth you had in the past. So you have mines which are mature, which are in the north, and you have to bring, which is desertic, you have to bring water or desalinize water to do the mine. So it's much more expensive than what it used to be. More than half of their exports is copper. So I think Chile has to reinvent itself a little out of copper in order to be back to a trend growth that is more interesting. But other than that, I don't have concerns. And in Argentina, I guess that Milei is doing a great job in many aspects. Even it was impossible to imagine that he could generate the fiscal adjustment he did. As usual, my friend, which was my economist at HSBC for Argentina, Javier Finkman, used to say that in Argentina, the big problem is the fear of floating. Obviously, there is a big pass-through to inflation in Argentina whenever you float. But one day you have to float and find a level and do the fiscal counter rate in the other side to offset the impact on inflation and have a normal life with the exchange rate. Perhaps with the victory he had now, he will be able to be more assertive on that. Let's see. But I think he's very noisy, but I think he's going in the right direction on the things that he's doing.
Andre, this has been awesome. One final thought. I mean, as an investor, whether it's in equities or fixed income, what is in terms of timing? I mean, what is your recommendation from a big picture standpoint for large investors? Should they be positioning now? Should they wait? What would you say to institutional investors who have been dipping their toes, obviously, in emerging markets? Maybe not in Brazil, but what are you saying to these investors?
For equity, I guess that if you believe that, as you mentioned at some point, that interest rates is a big part of the motivation to increase positions in Brazil, what I can tell you as an economist is that the central bank will have the conditions to start cutting in the first quarter of the year. I have March, it could be January, depending on what happens with the exchange rate. I have some concerns with the exchange rate by the end of the year, but if it performs well, perhaps it could be even January, the first cut. So I think that if you have this in mind, this element in mind, perhaps positioning for equity would be interesting now. Fixed income, I guess the central bank will probably tomorrow on the meeting of the Copon is still sustain a very hawkish tone because they are seeing how the hawkish tone is keeping the long end of the curve high and is doing the real work that monetary policy has to do on the reduction of the expansion of credit and so on. So I think it will be still for a while that it will take still for a while for the curves to invert, and you would have invert. I would say for the longer tenor. Of course, in the short term, it shows the expected monetary policy, but you think 5 or 10 years, and this will be even more strong, even stronger, if we have what I hope we could have, which is a surprising budget proposal for 2027. If Lula proposes a 2027 budget which shows more control on the rise of spending, I think investments would boom in Brazil, because people will say, well, either you have the opposition, which has a more fiscally responsible tone, and they have proved as governors, either one that will be the candidate, that they did that on their states, or you have Lula that is finally changing a little. Lula moves in mysterious ways. In 2003, Lula surprised all of us. Probably I am having some wishful thinking as a citizen, and I'm hoping that he could surprise us in the budget of 2000 proposed for 2027. Let's see. But I think that in fixed income, as the concern with the debt to GDP is more important, you have more resistance of the long end of the curve to flatten and invert. But for equity, perhaps the positioning is more clear with the reduction of the Selic rate, the short-term rate.
Andre, thank you so much. This has been amazing. Really, really.
My pleasure, Jean. My pleasure, Tom.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you very much.
Great to talk to you.
Okay, buddy.